Somewhere in the Mediterranean, around 300 BC, a merchant ship went down. The man who lost everything on that ship went on to reshape how human beings think about suffering for the next 2000 years. This isn't a video about stoic habits or morning routines or journaling tips. This is the story of where Stoicism actually came from, what it cost to the people who built it, and why it was never designed to make you calm. It was designed to make you unbreakable. It was night. The cargo was purple dye, Tyrian purple, the kind extracted from sea snails, drop by drop, 10,000 snails for a single gram of colors. The kind that make emperors look like emperors. Zeno of Citium had staked everything on it. He was a Paeonician merchant in his 30s. Successful, methodical, the kind of man who checked the weather before leaving port. The storm didn't care when the ship went down. Zeno lost his cargo, his wealth, his plans, everything he had built his identity around. He swam to the shore, arrived in Athens with nothing, a foreigner, middle-aged, starting over. Most people in that position spend the rest of their lives trying to rebuild what they lost. Zeno walked into a bookshop. The bookseller was reading aloud from a book about Socrates. Zeno stood there, soaking wet, broke, homeless, and listened. Then he asked one question. Where can I find men like this? The bookseller pointed to a philosopher passing in the street. Follow him, he said. Zeno followed, and everything we now call Stoicism began with that single step, taken by a man who had just lost everything, and somehow found himself exactly where he needed to be. For 20 years, Zeno studied. He sat under Crates the Cynic. He absorbed the Megarians. He read everything Athens had. Then he started teaching his own philosophy. He didn't build a school. He didn't charge a fee. He stood in a public colonnade, open air, north side of the Athenian marketplace. Anyone could walk in. Merchants, soldiers, slaves. That detail is more important than it sounds, because the philosophy Zeno taught wasn't built for people with leisure. It was built for people mid-storm, people who needed something that worked, not in theory, but under pressure. The colonnade was called the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch. His followers became known as the people of the porch, the Stoics. Stoicism spread quietly for 2 centuries. Then Rome encountered it. And here is where the story gets strange, because the philosophy didn't reach its peak inside a university, or an emperor's court, or a philosopher's study. It peaked inside 3 lives that should have produced 3 completely different philosophies. A slave wrote about freedom, a billionaire wrote about the emptiness of wealth, an emperor who wrote about his own smallness. Think about what it means. A man who owned nothing and a man who owned everything arrived at the exact same conclusion, independently, centuries apart. That's not coincidence, that's the philosophy working. The slave was Epictetus, born in what is now Turkey. Property, no rights, no name of his own. His master once began twisting his leg, slowly, for sport. Epictetus looked at him without expressing and said, "You are going to break it." The master kept twisting. The leg broke. Epictetus said, "Did I not tell you?" That's it. No rage, no pleading. Just a man so completely sovereign over his inner world that physical distraction couldn't reach him. The billionaire was Seneca, one of the wealthiest men in Rome. He wrote entire essays about how money poisons the soul. From a villa with marble floors and private baths, he concealed the Emperor Nero on mercy. Nero executed his enemies anyway. When Nero finally turned on Seneca, he sent soldiers with an order to die. Seneca opened his veins in a warm bath and spent his final hours dictating philosophy to his students. He lived in contradiction. He died in complete clarity. And then there was Marcus Aurelius, who never wanted to be an emperor. He was adopted into the imperial line against his preferences. Spent most of his reign not in Rome, but in military camps on the frontier, fighting wars he hadn't chosen, managing an empire he found exhausting, watching plague kill a third of his population. Every night in those tents, he opened a private journal and wrote notes to himself, not for history, not to be remembered, just to stay grounded for one more day. We call that journal meditations. It is still in print 2,000 years later. A slave, a senator, an emperor. 3 different centuries, 3 completely different lives. One conclusion. The only territory that has ever truly belonged to you is the space between what happens and how you respond. Not your circumstances, not other people's actions, not the storm or the empire or the master's hand. That fraction of a second before the reaction, before the collapse or the rage or the surrender. That space is yours. Take it. No emperor can legislate it. No master can chain it. No shipwreck can drown it. But here's that part modern Stoicism consistently leaves out. None of them were at peace. Marcus Aurelius struggled with anger his entire life. He mentions it in his own journal repeatedly, like a man confessing to himself. Seneca was terrified of death, even while writing some of history's most beautiful essays about accepting it. Epictetus carried the memory of chains, long after the chains were gone. Stoicism was never a destination, it was a daily return to that small, unyielding space inside, made by 3 men who needed it just as badly as anyone watching this. 2,000 years have passed since Zeno stood on that porch. The painted star is gone. The Athenian agora is ruins. The purple dye, the frontier camps, the imperial court, all of it dust. What survived is stranger than any of that. Not a building, not an institution, not even a name most people recognize. A way of thinking, passed from a shipwrecked merchant to a freed slave to an emperor writing alone in a tent, and somehow still intact. The reason it survived is simple. Every person in this lineage was tested, not theoretically, actually tested by loss, by chains, by power, by the slow weight of life they didn't design. And the philosophy held. That's the only proof that matters for any idea. Not whether it sounds right in a lecture hall, but whether it holds when everything falls apart. Stoicism held. Marcus Aurelius wrote this to himself. Not to be quoted, not to be remembered. On a night when the empire probably felt impossible. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He wasn't addressing history, he was talking to himself. But across 2,000 years, past every collapse, every plague, every empire that rose and fell after him, he was also somehow talking to you. Stoicism held under pressure, but pressure eventually breaks everything. What happened when it broke? What came after the philosophy of endurance? When endurance wasn't anymore? Sit with the wreckage, if you have any. Zeno did. Look what grew from it.